And yes, not least, Tom French. Okay, so and it's because of these gentlemen's and ladies' relationships that we're able to get some really great new corporate sponsors. I just wanted to run through the list of the new ones. Visit Hot Springs became a new corporate sponsor this year, and that was really awesome. And that was the relationships that we've built up with the area leaders here. Another new one is Tiny Town. How many of you remember Tiny Town? Okay. Peter's Paints and Design Center. Okay. I think a new one for us too is Paw Paw Bass and Spa. And then Ron Fuller Enterprises also stepped up to the plate. And so these are all new corporate sponsors for this year. We're still working on the renewals, but most of them have renewed with us, including National Parks Gifts and Souvenirs, courtesy of Barry Daniel, Myers Realty, courtesy of Andy Myers, AT&T, Selected Funeral and Life Insurance Company, and then we're still working on keeping our fingers crossed on Arvest Bank as well too. So all of these corporate sponsors, we basically want to give a big salute to them, and to all of you that are out there in the audience. It's your relationships that are very valuable to our organization, and that's how we're able to pick up not only personal dollars but also corporate dollars as well too. 501c3 organization. It's a write-off either to the corporation or to the individual. So that's all I have to report.
Thank you, John. Now we're going to hear from Julie next.
Yeah, and I'm going to go off the script for just a second. I just want to make the observation that everybody who ever made a loop around that town, growing up in Hot Springs, would buy one of those shirts. We wouldn't have to have any corporate members or any fundraisers. We would have at least $10 million. But speaking of fundraisers, not this coming weekend, but the next weekend, the last Sunday of September, we will have our annual Hidden Hot Springs. This year, I really kind of feel like it is Hidden Hot Springs because we're going to Circle Drive. And I'm really surprised at the number of people that don't know Circle Drive exists. It was at one time, and still is, beautiful homes, but a few decades ago, almost like a silk stocking district. It sits up on a ridge in between Park Avenue and an actual ravine. And we have two homes there. One, a smaller, early 1900s home, which has been redone and is beautiful. And then a larger home, two-story white home up on the top of the ridge. That is kind of an interesting blend. It's a beautiful home, but the people who live in it are also collectors. So it's almost like going through a museum. So you get a little extra boost. Tickets are $75 each, and that entitles you to visit both homes and for as long as you want. So please come out and support us. That's one of our major fundraising things every year. Liz?
We actually have tickets for sale at the table back there if they want to pick them up
Yes,
today.
certainly. Go right ahead. All right.
Or through the internet. Thank you, Julie. You all received our minutes from the May meeting. Gail, did you? Okay. Make the motion to approve the minutes. Gail Rice. Do we have a Ron Fuller? All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Okay, the minutes are approved. Thank you very much. And Gail, I think she was probably putting up her hand, but thank you so much. Okay, thank you very much. Liz, we're ready for you now. Thank you. Thank you for being here today. First, I want to talk about next month. Next month, please don't come to our program here.
because next month we're going to be having our program at the Arlington Hotel rather than at the library. That's because, did you know 2024 is the 100th anniversary of the building of the Arlington Hotel? That's really special. So we're going to have a special program at the Arlington on the third Tuesday of the month, October 22nd at noon. Now, this program is sponsored by the Historical Society and also by the Hot Springs Documentary Film Institute and also by the Garland County Library. It's going to be given by Hollis Duncan, who's going to use historic photos and his years of research to tell the Arlington's fascinating story. So, pop quiz. Where's he going to be? What day of the week?
Tuesday.
And October the 22nd. Okay, y'all are pretty good. And Brian, are you ready for me to introduce you? That was perfect timing, just perfect. We're very happy to welcome Brian Irby. He's been on the staff of the Arkansas State Archives for the last 8 years, and he works on educational materials for the archives. He's got a master's degree in history from the University of Central Arkansas and a master's in library science from the University of North Texas. He's an Arkansas native. He lives in North Little Rock with his wife Jennifer and his dogs Castor and Pollux and his cat Orion. And I asked him, well, you must be interested in astronomy. And he said, no, my mother-in-law is really interested in freaky medicine. I was kind of making points with my mother. You know, he's a smart guy. I've known Brian for a while, and I can testify to his love of sharing history with others. We celebrated National History Day together a few years ago by giving a succession of programs all day long to an alarming number of Lake Hamilton School middle students. It was an experience you definitely want to share with someone as great as Brian. Once in an interview, he said, Arkansas has such an interesting past, full of drama and intrigue. And we're very glad he's going to share some of that drama and intrigue with us today.
I had almost forgotten about our time at Lake Hamilton Middle School. I think it was one of those things that I really needed a nap. We spent all day long talking about history, middle school students, and by the end of it, I was pretty exhausted. But yeah, so what I'm going to talk about today, I'm going to talk a little about this ongoing fight that started about the last quarter of the 19th century and went into the first quarter of the 20th century, and that's this long ongoing fight to legalize prizefighting in Arkansas. And so let me set the scene. So we've got a guy named James Corbett, who is the world champion boxer, and he's pretty well known, you would think, and he's being challenged by a guy named Robert Fitzsimmons, who's a boxer from the UK. And they're going to have this big world championship fight. Now, today, if that were to happen, you would know that just about any place in America would be happy to host that fight. Well, in 1895, that was not the case, because prize fighting, for the most part, all across the country was illegal. You could be arrested for doing so. So how do we get to this spot? So there's some cultural things we need to talk about. It's the political things we need to talk about. That builds together to make prize fighting illegal. So there was like a national movement to outlaw prize fighting. And a lot of people saw prize fighting itself as being immoral. I mean, after all, we have two men that are going to be pummeling each other. And in polite society, people are not supposed to do things like that. So there's this attitude that in polite society, we should make sure that this kind of thing doesn't happen. Couple that with the fact that a lot of times these fights were held at taverns, in back rooms, and you have a lot of drinking going on. You have people beating on each other. You have people gambling on who's going to beat the other one more than, and this kind of contributed to this idea that this is just something that we should make sure doesn't happen in America. And then you have kind of criminal elements that were starting to come in. You had fights that were being rigged, people being paid to take dives for money. So they decided that this was just not something that should be. There were lots of reports in the newspaper that kind of compounded this idea. For instance, in a 1872 report on a prize fight that happened just north of Little Rock, the Arkansas Gazette reported there were about 200 persons present, mostly roughs, who seemed to take a lively interest in this brutish pastime. But as you can imagine, there was also some class elements that were involved. People saw prize fighting as being attractive to more lower class people. But things started to change a little bit after the Civil War, when you had more middle class people starting to take interest. There were some changes that happened. Before this, they were pretty much bare knuckle fights. Just you would have two men just meet in the middle of a field or something like that, and then just beat on each other. Well, they started to come up with new rules, like having gloves and having timed rounds, things like that. And so that kind of made it a little more respectable to the average person. And so you had a lot of middle class people starting to take an interest in the sport. And this ended up fueling a lot of reformers' attitudes towards it, against prize fighting. They saw it as a corrupting influence to the younger folks. So you had a lot of young men who would come out to see the fights, and these young men were obviously being corrupted, and then they'd go home and carry on. And as with the Prohibition movement, women ended up playing a crucial role in the crusade against prize fighting. In the later half of the 19th century, you had a coalition of feminists and suffragists who all took up the cause to prohibit prize fighting in America. To them, the sport was barbaric and had a detrimental effect upon boys and young men. Moreover, it was barbaric, they said, and it was something that was threatening Christian civilization. The growth of the women's suffrage movement enhanced this trend towards as more women became politically active. At the forefront for women were issues that affected the family, and such as liquor, gambling, violence. And the editor of the Montana Record Herald wrote, "When it comes to questions of controlling the liquor traffic or gambling, prize fighting, and such other social and moral questions, there is little doubt that the female vote would go pretty solidly in one direction." Arkansas's women activists certainly saw their role in this. The Women's Chronicle, which was the newspaper of record for the women's movement in Arkansas, blasted Arkansas's social climate and political leaders for allowing prize fighting to happen in their towns. In one editorial, they wrote, "Truly a low standard of morality when a prize fight becomes a respectable entertainment. It would indeed be well to drop the curtain here upon the scene and not investigate until public sentiment demands at the hands of those entrusted with the purity and guardianship of the city a higher standard of morality." This sentiment was echoed by the Women's Christian Temperance Movement, or union, whose official stance in regard to the sport was lotteries and prize fighting are first cousins of the saloon. We should set forces in motion to outlaw these barbarisms and to make it a legal offense to advertise or report any of them through the columns of the press. But nevertheless, the press were very, very vocal in advertising whatever prize fights were happening around the area. There were lots of reports, sometimes full-page play-by-play analysis of fights that were going on, despite there being kind of a them also taking the stand against the sport. They knew the readership wanted to hear about these things. Strengthening the moral case against prize fighting in the South was this idea that we needed to reform the region's image throughout the rest of the country. After the Civil War, they wanted a more softer image of the South. And throughout the 1880s and 1890s, Southern civic leaders began to call for a more genteel image. And of course, prize fighting isn't going to fit very nicely in that image. Among the changes was the need to extirpate the violent personae stereotype that had marked the Southern person throughout the rest of the country. With this came a crackdown on prize fighting, as the sport was exemplifying this kind of male aggression towards each other. Much of this was a clash between the evangelical ideal of biblical meekness in conflict with the cultural image of defense of honor. As evangelical denominations became more predominant in Southern culture, they exerted themselves more as opponents of violent sports, including football. So with all this said, the Arkansas legislature was meeting in 1891, and there was this idea that somebody needed to do something about having a state law against prize fighting. The Arkansas Baptist newspaper wrote, "Great stress is laid on the character of the men who make up our legislature, that in their hands is the moral and material well-being of the state." The Arkansas Methodist newspaper was a little more explicit. They said, "We are pleased to note that our legislature seems favorably inclined to measures of moral character, and we are therefore led to expect some wholesome laws against Sabbath breaking, prize fighting, gambling, and so on." Now, one of the champions against prize fighting happened to be the governor, James P. Eagle, who was a Confederate veteran and had become a Christian during the Civil War. And then after the war, he entered the ministry before entering into politics. So he was a champion against prize fighting in that same mode. At the beginning of his second term, he decided to take a firm stance against the sport. He decided to charge the legislature to enact a law against prize fighting. So, in his opening address to the legislature, he said, "It is far too frequent that roughs come within our borders to do their brutal work," and then encouraged them to pass the law outlawing prize fighting. In the legislature, there were several other people who were so inclined. One, John W. Cranford, was a prominent attorney, and he was active in the Presbyterian Church in Jefferson County, and he was also the son of a Presbyterian minister. He introduced Senate Bill 100, titled "Act to Punish and Prevent Prize Fighting in the State of Arkansas." Language in the bill declared that prize fighting, whether with gloves or without, was an offense to good ordered society. The bill made prize fighting a felony punishable by imprisonment for a period of 1 to 3 years. Many in the press ended up cheering this new legislation. As the bill made its way to the Senate floor, the Arkansas Gazette urged other newspapers in the state to support the bill. And they wrote, "The bruisers are fighting right under your noses. Can't you hurry up that bill to prevent prize fighting?" With the press's support, the Senate passed the bill unanimously. The bill then went to the House of Representatives for debate. And here's where it gets a little tricky. John L. Sullivan, who was the most famous boxer of his time, if you think about 19th century boxers, his image is what comes to mind. You think of him standing like this, you know. And so he came to Little Rock to argue against the passage of this bill. Now, what he said in his testimony to the House, I don't know. It was not recorded, but there were lots of people who came to see him. The whole upper gallery of the House was filled with people anxious to see this great boxer. In fact, it was so the support was so great that Representative Joseph Short of Fulton County argued that it was unnecessary to waste any time in discussing the bill. Let's just go ahead and pass it. Well, the House ended up introducing 3 amendments. The second amendment to the bill made the crime a misdemeanor, unlike the Senate bill, which made it a felony. And their version of the bill passed 17-2. And then the bill went back to the Senate to vote on the 3 amendments. The Senate rejected the amendments and ordered the bill into conference committee of both the House and the Senate. The conference committee recommended that the House withdraw the second amendment, changing the penalty of the crime, and send it back to the House. From there, the status of the bill becomes murky. The House accepted the recommendation of the committee and passed it without the second amendment, leaving the penalty a felony with a fine of $100 to $2,500. Senate also accepted the committee's report and sent the bill to the governor for signature, and Governor Eagle quickly signed it. Now, all this is good. The reason why I go into this is all going to become important in a few years. Now, despite this new law, prize fighting continued to happen across the state. In fact, there were several indictments for prize fighting, but the surprising thing is there were no convictions. No jury would convict anybody for prize fighting. And one of the things they thought was the reason for this is the fact that this was a felony. They don't want to throw somebody in prison for prize fighting. So they ended up in 1893 going back to the legislature. Senator Crawford, J.M. McCallum, who was a representative of the House in the House of Representatives from here in Garland County, ended up proposing another bill. And this was House Bill 222 that made it a misdemeanor punishable by a fine of $100 and $2,500, but with no jail time. This raised the hackles of many Senate leaders who thought, well, we're just watering down this bill. But ended up passing after much debate. And so now it was no longer a felony, now it was a misdemeanor. I've forgotten all about the PowerPoint that we spent so much time trying to get up and running. Sorry. So there's Governor Eagle there, and here's the legislature who were. So it was So for the first time in 1894, Charlie Mitchell was challenging James Corbett, who is the only boxer who had ever beaten John L. Sullivan. And they were looking for a place to hold their fight. So they chose here in Hot Springs. And after months of legal wrangling for venues across the city, they had been trying for a long time to get this fight going on. They had even tried to have it at Coney Island in New York and been refused in several other places. So they settled on Hot Springs, because R.C. Chambers, who was a Hot Springs businessman, saw an opportunity. In November of 1893, Chambers left Hot Springs for Chicago, Illinois, to meet with fight promoters. He proposed that they fight in Hot Springs on January 15, 1894. Chambers' plan was to create a stock company that would take out loans to build an arena for the city, with the stockholders being paid back through the gate receipts and profits from the fight. He guaranteed that the building would be used for future prize fights as well. Now, the excitement over drawing this fight to Hot Springs drew attention from anti-prize fighting crusaders. A reporter asked Governor William Meade Fishback to comment on the ongoing preparations in Hot Springs. Fishback hedged his bets like a good politician, telling reporters that he doubted the fight would occur. If it did, he was not familiar enough with the law to make a comment. But if promoters tried to hold the fight in the Spa City, it would be up to local law enforcement to arrest perpetrators and not state government officials. But due to pressure from most anti-prize fighting advocates, however, 2 weeks later, the governor had changed his stance on the issue, declaring that the fight would not occur in Arkansas on his watch. Many professional fighters continue to look for possible fight venues. Alarmed reformers tried to ensure that the state governments would not allow their states to be used for prize fighting. In 1894, James J. Corbett was shopping for a venue for a fight with Peter the Black Prince Jackson. The Springfield Union, a Massachusetts newspaper, ended up sending a questionnaire to 29 state governors inquiring into what their prize fighting laws were in their states. William Fishback responded that prize fighting was outlawed in Arkansas and that he would not allow Corbett and Jackson to fight here in Arkansas. Fast forward to 1895, and Arkansas's law was put to the test when James Corbett again picked Hot Springs in which to hold his fight with Bob Ruby Robert Fitzsimmons. Two boxers have been trying to organize a fight since 1894, finally settling on the Florida Athletics Club in Jacksonville, Florida, as the venue. When Florida's legislature suddenly outlawed prize fighting, the Florida Athletic Club considered holding the fight in Georgia. When Georgia's governor declared that the fight would not occur in his state, they ended up moving out to Texas. Actually, New Orleans had at this time been kind of the prize fighting capital of the South, but they had had a death in the ring, and that suddenly that was not an option for them anymore. So they ended up trying Texas, and they ended up going through a lot of trouble in Texas, and it became clear they were not going to be able to hold the fight there either. But eager to attract tourist dollars to Hot Springs Mayor Whitfin W. Waters and City Attorney W.H. Martin decided to pursue bringing that fight to the city. Two men met with officials from the Florida Athletic Club on October 7th, 1895. in Dallas, Texas, and offered to hold the fight at Whittington Park here in Hot Springs. They were certain that they could skirt the law with little consequence. Martin told the press that he was certain that the governor could not interfere unless things got out of hand, which he promised would not happen. James P. Clark, who was the governor of Arkansas at the time, and he had won his election to the Arkansas governorship by a landslide in September 1894. He watched with interest as the plans were underway here in Hot Springs. Although sentiment that the fight would not take place in Arkansas under his watch, his stance was tempered by the recognition that even with a fine of $2,500, proceeds would outweigh whatever fine they had to pay. When asked for a comment, Governor Clark told the press, "I do not dare to discuss this matter any further, but I will say, as I've said before, there will be no prize fight in Hot Springs, and I will exercise all my authority to prevent the fight, and I have enough power to prevent it." He wrote a letter to the athletic club and Hot Springs city officials demanding that they cancel the fight. When he received a defiant reply from those involved, he declared, if need be, he would use military force to prevent the fight. He wrote letters to both Corbett and Fitzsimmons, warning the boxers that holding the fight, quote, is a violation of our law and an affront to the sentiment of state pride entertained by our people. In the present state of a public opinion, which at last is the force that inflicts penalties, prize fighters have no rights which those in authority are bound to respect. Meanwhile, the building commenced in Whittington Park for the fight, despite these legal issues and moral opposition that continue to hover over its preparations. Arkansas Methodists decried the actions in Hot Springs, reprinting an editorial from the Pacific Methodist Advocate. Away with the prize fight, the bullfight, and the saloon. Let every honest man who pays tax and casts a ballot rise up in the strength and majesty of his manhood and cast out the accursed. I love 19th century newspapers. On October 14th, a group of ministers in Hot Springs met at the Central Methodist Church to adopt a resolution protesting the fight. One minister went so far to say that, quote, he considered it a personal insult that a crowd of thugs from the north should come south to conduct their disreputable business. We never go north with our fights. An epidemic of smallpox could not be worse. Among those gathered in the Methodist Church was Circuit Judge Alexander Duffy. 3 days before, Duffy had summoned Sheriff Hout to his court. He told the lawman that he had heard rumors that the Corbett Fitzsimmons fight was going to occur, and he reminded the lawman of the state law against prize fighting and ordered him to make every effort to prevent the fight. He told Hout that arresting the participants after the fight would not be a satisfactory conclusion. His charge was to stop it before a single punch was thrown. Although Hot Springs officials could not stop the preparations for the fight, he opined, nor could they prevent the city from building the fight venue. They must prevent the fight from occurring. He also told the sheriff to order a posse of citizens to assist him in stopping the fight, and that anyone who refused to join would be subject to a fine ranging from $100 to $1,000 and imprisonment from 1 day to 1 year. Meanwhile, Governor Clark examined the existing case law on the matter to ascertain what his powers might be to prevent this fight. While he and his lawyers studied the law, they discovered that the 1891 and 1893 laws might be called into question due to the way that the 1891 bill had been passed. They argued that when the House presented amendments to the bill as it was passed in the Senate, the procedure under Article 5, Section 22 of the state constitution required that those amendments be voted by yea or nay vote in the House. Instead, the Senate asked the House to demur on the second of the three amendments. However, when the legislature passed the bill without the second amendment, it failed to do so by a yea or nay vote, meaning that the bill, as signed by the governor in 1891, was invalid. Consequently, the 1893 bill, which had amended the original law, was also invalid. While the law remained murky, Governor Clark remained steadfast in his opposition to the fight. He declared that the core of the case was, quote, who is the higher authority in the state, the governor or a couple of prize fighters, and those who are in favor of their meeting. Although he felt that the sheriff Howe could be expected to enforce the ruling, he was not exactly sure that he would do so. He summoned Brigadier General George P. Taylor, who was head of the Arkansas State Guard, to discuss the strength of the state militia in case they were to be needed to stop this fight. Taylor told Clark that he would have 850 soldiers ready to go to Hot Springs at a moment's notice. Corbett arrived in Hot Springs on the morning of October 16th, and General Taylor following 2 days later. With the fight now in danger, Hot Springs officials tried to negotiate new terms. They agreed to shorten the fight and guarantee less violence, but the governor balked at these new terms, declaring once again that there would be no fight in Arkansas soil. October 17th, CBT, prosecuting attorney for the 7th Judicial District, filed an affidavit in Garland County charging that Corbett was in the county threatening to engage in a prize fight with Fitzsimmons, and that said Corbett threatens and is about to commit an assault and battery upon the person of said Fitzsimmons, the same being a character calculated to endanger human life. He issued an arrest warrant and ordered law enforcement officials to arrest Corbett for conspiracy to commit assault. Sheriff Howe found Corbett at the Arlington Hotel and served the warrant, and he was held under a $10,000 bond. Oddly, Garland County Sheriff Howe agreed to allow Corbett to travel to Little Rock to attend a public event at the Capitol Hotel on October 18th, and appointed Special Deputy W.L. Babcock to travel with the prisoner to the city. A crowd of well-wishers greeted the party at the Capitol Theater. Corbett told the crowd that he was not there to violate any laws, but only to have a scientific sparring match, which he would not consider violated any state. He complained that his opponent, Fitzsimmons, had not bothered even to come to Arkansas yet, and that he was having to bear the brunt of these legal issues. He took a moment to trash talk Fitzsimmons in his interview. I am champion and don't have to do this. It is not expected that the world's champion should undergo all the troubles and unpleasant experiences to meet a man who does not belong to his class. What would I gain if I whipped Fitzsimmons, and what would he lose? Absolutely nothing at all. The next day, Corbett's attorneys filed for a writ of habeas corpus, arguing that the 1891 law was invalid. While it was clear that the law was precarious, anti-prize fighting press was caught off guard and left astounded that the 1891 law could be considered invalid. Many blamed the legal snafu on Governor Clark, noting that he was Attorney General at the time and should have caught this. Court Chancellor Leland Leatherman considered Corbett's habeas corpus motion. Leatherman's ruling agreed that the 1891 law was invalid, having failed to be been passed under proper procedure. Leatherman went further, though, arguing that Corbett was not intending to fight a prize fight, but would instead fight a glove contest, which he did not consider against the law. As a result, Leatherman ruled in Corbett's favor and released him. State Attorney General E.D. Kinsworth appealed the decision to the state Supreme Court. Hot Springs City Attorney W.H. Martin represented Corbett before the court and argued that the invalidity of the prize fighting law on procedural grounds. The Attorney General argued that the crime was not necessarily that of prize fighting, but assault, or in this case, the threat of assault. During the arguments in front of the court, Justice Wilson Hemingway and Justice Henry Bunn seemed to agree with the Attorney General that this was the issue before the court, not the validity of the law. Even if the punishment section of the law was ruled invalid by the court, there were other laws that prevented assault and battery. It seemed that the state Supreme Court at this point was weighed in favor of the Attorney General as it went into deliberation on October 22nd, 1895. As the court deliberated, fight promoters met on October 22nd to discuss ways to change the fight to make it more palatable to state lawmakers. One suggestion was to use lighter, softer gloves. Another was to have a fight on points and not whether the opponent was knocked out. The promoters said the two boxers asked them to accept these new terms and postpone the fight until November the 11th. Corbett quickly agreed to the new rules, but Fitzsimmons decided they were unacceptable, especially the postponement. Fitzsimmons said he was unwilling to train for 2 more weeks in advance of a fight that he was not sure would even happen. The Arkansas, so in all actuality, the fight ended up being called off a week before it was actually supposed to take place. The Arkansas Methodists cheered the fight's cancellation and took credit for its result, calling the contestant letters of protest received to the paper "Thunderbolts Flaming Hot." We trust the storm has blown over. It is to the credit of our people, and especially the people called Methodists, that communications, protests, and resolutions against the proposed prize fight have been pouring into our office. The educative influence of these things have been attained chiefly through the mass meetings whence they have emanated. So Corbett ended up leaving the state and traveled to St. Louis to regroup, and Governor Clark issued a statement: prize fighting will not be permitted in this state, no matter who or how high a purse is put up as an inducement to that ilk of humanity. The state was closed to prize fighting, as was most of the country. By 1898, the only place allowing sanctioned prize fights was Carson City, Nevada. But Clark spoke too soon. Prize fighting continued to happen throughout the state. It kind of culminated later on with this gentleman here, George Washington Donaghy, who was governor of Arkansas. Jack White, who was the director of the Rose City Athletic Club in Little Rock, he began organizing a prize fight between Joe Mandott and Joe Sherman, 2 nationally known boxers, to take place in 1912. White asserted it is not a prize fight, but the contestants are not receiving 1 cent for their services. No prize is being offered for the winner. White announced that the purpose of the fight, besides being entertainment, would be a test to the new ordinance outlawing prize fighting in Little Rock. Because of the controversial nature of the program, White realized there might be a large crowd that wanted to come see the fight. So he began approaching several places throughout the city and ended up settling on Little Rock's Kempner Theater for the event. As he continued to plan the fight, Governor George Washington Donaghy watched with interest. Donaghy was campaigning for a third term in Arkansas and needed to appear tough in his fight against the sport. He declared that he would do everything in his power to prevent the club from holding boxing matches. He downplayed the fact that no prizes would be awarded to the winner and argued a boxing contest is only a new name for a prize fight. All power of the state will be exerted, if necessary, to prevent such an exhibition from occurring. White's plans ended up hitting a snag. There were heavy rains that ended up delaying the contest, but he ended up rescheduling the event for May 31st, 1912, and having it in the Pulaski Heights neighborhood. So on the day of the fight, Governor Donaghy arrived to the venue, and he was with B.W. Green of the Arkansas National Guard and a handful of other law enforcement officials. They approached Jack White and demanded that he stop the proceedings. White refused, informing the governor he would not stop the show, and even invited the officials to witness the boxing match. Donaghy and his men left the venue and went outside to a waiting car where they sat outside waiting for law enforcement to stop the fight. The first match was scheduled between one-round Adolph Jacobson and battling Homer Hurd, two Little Rock residents. After the bell sounded, the two boxers approached each other. Jacobson reached out and slapped Hurd on the wrist, shouting, "Take that, curse you." At that provocative moment, Little Rock's constable, Renton Tunna, leaped into the ring. "Stop, both of you, you're under arrest." The lawman yelled as other police officials started surrounding the ring. Tunna declared that he was arresting the men for violating a law of the governor of Arkansas. Police ended up handcuffing the two men. They also arrested Jack White and led the men to the paddy wagon. The men were taken to the constable's office in order to appear before the judge the next morning and then released. June 5th, the men went before Judge Simon Ellenbogen. Ellenbogen was a naturalized German immigrant who had settled in Little Rock in the 1870s and established a saloon and a billiards parlor. The defense's case was that the fight was a scientific boxing match with no prize at stake. Therefore, the contest could be legally called a prize fight. Pulaski County Prosecutor M.E. Dunaway struggled to show evidence that the men were fighting for a prize. As the former proprietor of an establishment that was often maligned by moral crusaders, Judge Ellenbogen delivered a speech praising the sport and its effect upon promoting manliness. Dunaway quickly rearrested the men and then walked out of the courthouse, this time charging them with inciting a riot. The charges were then dismissed again by Judge Ellenbogen. With the law now clarified, the Rose City Athletic Club held another event on June 10th to benefit flood victims in eastern Arkansas. The event went off without controversy. As the decade of the 19-teens went on, the nation began to soften its stance on prize fighting. Former President Theodore Roosevelt championed the legalization of boxing, which led to a nationwide repeal of anti-boxing laws. Officials also turned a blind eye to illegal boxing matches. By the 1920s, public attitudes toward prize fighting had turned much more favorable. Much of the change was the result of an enthusiasm in American culture for physical fitness. Fights promoted by organizations designed to promote fitness, such as the Young Men's Christian organization, were seen as more legitimate than those fought in the back rooms of drunken bar rooms. Coupled with this, rule changes in the sport designed to make the activity less threatening, was the fact that a lot of these young men had done boxing while they were soldiers in World War I. And many of the soldiers came home from the war with a newfound appreciation of this manly art. 1923, Arkansas legislature considered a bill to make prize fighting legal in the state of Arkansas. The bill limited boxing contests to 10 rounds and created a state boxing commission. The bill passed the Senate 17-6. What probably enticed the legislators was a 5% tax on gate receipts, would predictably bring in revenue of about $100,000 a year. This boxing commission continues in operation to this day. Referring to the public's acceptance of the sport when the bill passed, it hardly even made news. Arkansas's boxing fans could now enjoy the sport in peace.
Thank you, Brian. Do we have any questions? Okay. Well, we hope to see you all next month at Arlington. Thank you.